Hi, everybody. So today I'm going to go through chapter 8 of my book. The book is called Whose Life Is It? The Moral Debt for Life Enslavement. All right, make sure y'all can see it. Okay, here we go. The Public's Complicity, Democratic Authorization of Comprehensive Violence. Chapters 1 through 7 establish the complete framework of life slavery. Chapter 1 proved through the disposal rights test that the master state claims ownership over your life through its interference with your disposal rights. Chapter 2 identified your parents as the primary life enslavers who impose existence without consent, creating a moral debt for life enslavement through their unjust enrichment. Chapter 3 demonstrated how the master state compounds this breach by prohibiting your exit while extracting value, presenting the impossible choice between option 1, recognizing inalienable exit rights, and option 2, providing full material support if exit is prohibited. Chapter 3 documented how courts deny relief through immunity doctrines, procedural barriers, and the legal profession's monopoly. Chapter 5 examined how the state's monopoly on violence operates as the enforcement mechanism of life slavery, with manufactured consent creating the psychological programming that makes violence invisible. Chapter 6 cataloged the perpetual violence maintaining your captivity, involuntary commitment, property seizures, forced labor through licensing restrictions, traffic citations, extracting tribute while you travel to keep the master state's living property, which is yourself, and compulsory jury service. Chapter 7 demonstrated how capitalism extracts surplus value through violence-backed coercion, with the master state deploying perpetual violence to maintain an artificial scarcity of capital and forced participation. This chapter proves that in a democracy, the public bears direct liability for this violence. The master state does not act independently, it acts with public authorization, and ultimately a threat of violence, guns backed decision. The public is like their government deploys because that violence exists only through continuous democratic authorization. The people around you will not support your liberation because they need you to serve their needs. Your parents to give them grandchildren to provide emotional satisfaction. Your romantic partner wants you to stay because you validate the attention, affection, and presence confirm their work. Your friends want you to be so they can buy support when they need it. Your employees keep you working so they can extract surplus value from your labor. Your landlord wants you to pay rent. The government wants you to pay tax. You continue existing does so for self-serving purposes. They are enriched by your enslavement. Your exit would terminate this enrichment. So they deploy violence through involuntary commitment, through structure, through economic to maintain your forced continuation with whether you want to exist. They are concerned with ensuring that you continue serving their needs. Democratic participants occupy extractive roles simultaneously as voters and jurors. They authorize the master state's violence. As economic actors, they deploy violence through property claims and state distorted markets and employment relationships. As life enslavers, 60% of adults who are parents, they create new beings who will experience these violent conditions while extracting emotional benefits from those beings' continued existence. Let's see if there's anybody here. Okay, great. The public's demand for extraction. The reality of extraction is comprehensive. The public makes demands while deploying violence to enforce them. These demands form an interconnected system of extraction, each reinforcing the others. Be successful. And this is all based on the book title, right? Because this chapter sort of ties it all together. Be successful. The demand for economic productivity. Licensed professionals, approximately 30% of the workforce, benefit directly from state violence. Maintaining occupational licensing, they extract wage premiums averaging 15 to 20% above competitive market rates through artificial scarcity created by licensing restrictions. These professionals these professionals actively lobby for violence. They support legislation expanding licensing requirements, oppose reforms reducing barriers to entry, fund political campaigns maintaining the system, and participate in regulatory boards that deploy violence against unlicensed competitors. Chapter 6 documented the mechanism. The master state criminalizes earning a livelihood without permission, threatening imprisonment for unauthorized practice. The master state interferes with your ability to dispose of your resources freely. You must obtain permission and pay tribute in the form of licensing fees, educational requirements, continuing education costs. If you work without permission, the master state deploys violence, criminal prosecution, fines, and imprisonment. But licensed professionals don't benefit passively. They demand that you participate in the system. They demand that you be successful, meaning work within systems they've rigged through state violence to extract value from your labor. They demand you comply with their artificial scarcity while they profit from your compliance. Capitalists extract surplus value through employment relationships maintained by the state. Chapter 7 documented the flow of extraction. You create value through labor. Capitalists appropriate most of that value as profit, paying you the minimal cost, the minimal necessary to maintain your labor power. This extraction depends entirely on state violence. Property rights divorced from productive use exist only through state violence. Work or starve is coercive because the master state maintains an artificial scarcity of capital through violence. They resist labor organizing, oppose minimum wage increases, fight healthcare reforms, and support right to work laws that undermine unions, all to maintain their extraction. Success in their framework means accepting exploitation while they profit from your compliance. Employment relationships extract surplus value only because the master state prohibits peaceful alternatives. Live for me, validate me, give me grandkids. The parental demands. Life enslavers, approximately 60% of adults who are parents, extract benefits from procreation, documented in Chapter 2, meaning and purpose, emotional satisfaction, social status, legacy, and existential validation. You bear all the costs. Physical maintenance, 2.6 to 3 million over your lifetime. Economic costs, 101, 250 hours of forced labor, 805,000 in taxes, 2.7 in surplus value extraction, psychological costs, and I break this down in greater detail in Chapter 9. So that's where these numbers are coming from. Psychological costs, existential distress, emotional suffering, mental health illness, risk, moral injury, temporal costs, 50% of your life consumed by mandatory activities, and social costs, relationships for performance, ostracism for noncompliance, systemic remedies, identity costs, burdens imposed without consent, and existential costs, meaninglessness, mortality awareness, suffering without purpose. Chapter 2 documented the unjust enrichment framework. Life enslavers receive benefits at your expense under circumstances making retention unjust. The act of procreation imposed comprehensive costs without any possibility of consent. Your parents benefited from creating you. You pay for maintaining your involuntary existence. But life enslavers don't merely benefit from the past act of procreation. They demand continuous extraction. The reality is explicit. Live for me. Continue existing so I can extract emotional benefits from your presence. Validate me. Make my decision to procreate appear ethical by living a life I can point to as evidence I didn't harm you. Give me grandkids. Perpetuate the cycle of life slavery so I can extract additional emotional benefits from a new generation of life slaves. These demands reveal the ongoing nature of parental extraction. Your parents didn't merely harm you once through procreation. They continue benefiting they continue benefiting from your continued enslavement. They support the master state's violence prohibiting your exit because your exit would eliminate their ongoing benefits. When you suffer, they demand excuse me one second. When you suffer, they demand you smile for me, perform happiness to maintain their emotional comfort. When you question whether your existence is worth continuing, they deploy psychiatric violence, reporting suicidal ideation, supporting involuntary commitment, advocating for the prohibition on assisted death. They actively maintain your captivity because your captivity benefits them. Life enslavers make up a majority of Democratic participants. They vote to maintain the prohibition on opting out. They serve on juries that deny exit rights. They report concerning statements about wanting to die. They lobby against right to die legislation. They actively deploy violence, maintaining your forced continuation because their emotional comfort depends on your captivity. Follow my morals, justify my ethics, obey my unjust laws. The demand for validation. Chapter 6 documented the contradictory messages deployed to maintain your captivity. When you need help, they say, take personal responsibility. Stop whining. That's life. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. When you seek to opt out, stop being selfish. We're all connected. You can't just quit. You need help, but I'm not the one who's going to help you. This selective deployment of rhetoric serves the public self-interest. They claim no collective responsibility to deploy violence on your behalf, no duty to use state violence to redistribute property, to reform exploitative systems, or to providing material support. But they claim collective authority to deploy violence against you, the authority to prohibit opting out, to maintain a captive population, and to ensure a captive workforce. The deeper demand reveals itself. Follow my morals, justify my ethics. The public doesn't merely want compliance. They want you to validate their worldview. They want you to accept their system of life slavery is legitimate, that their laws are just, that their violence is necessary. When you recognize that your existence was imposed without consent, they say you need help. When you calculate the cost you bear, when you calculate that the cost you bear exceed any benefits you receive, they call you depressed. When you seek a peaceful exit, they call it self-harm and deploy psychiatric violence to prevent it. This isn't a concern for your well-being. It is a violent demand for validation. They need you to believe existence is good. They need you to accept a forced continuation. They need you to follow their morals, justify their ethics, obey their unjust laws, because your compliance validates their worldview. If you were permitted, if you were permitted to exit peacefully, that would demonstrate the system's failure. If people could opt out, and some did, that would prove existence isn't universally desirable. That would prove that procreation harms some people. That would prove the master state's claim interest in preserving life is actually an interest in preserving a captive population for extraction. So they prohibit your exit. They demand compliance. They insist you continue existing, participating, following their rules, not for your benefit, but to maintain the legitimacy of life slavery. 5 independent grounds for liability. Democratic participants bear liability for the comprehensive violence they deploy on 5 independent grounds. Each ground establishes liability separately. Together, they demonstrate that the public cannot escape responsibility. First, principal agent liability. Democratic theory holds that the government acts as an agent of the people. Citizens are principals. Government officials are agents. Agents act on behalf of principals. Principals bear responsibility for agents' authorized actions. Every election authorizes continuing violence. Every jury verdict endorses state violence. Every tax payment funds violence. Democratic participants continuously authorize state violence through their participation. Christopher Cutts established that participants in collective action share responsibility for outcomes produced through their participation. Democratic participants authorize state violence, benefit from state violence, and bear responsibility for state violence deployed on their behalf. Chapter 2 established the unjust enrichment framework. One party is enriched at another's expense under circumstances making retention unjust. Here we apply this framework to democratic participants. Licensed professionals, approximately 30% of the workforce. As detailed in Section 2.A, these professionals extract wage premiums of 15 to 20% through state-maintained artificial scarcity. They actively lobby for violence that maintains their extraction, while your ability to compete freely transfers value to them. Capitalists and corporations. Capitalists are unjustly enriched through the extraction of surplus value from your labor, approximately 2.7 million over your working life, as documented in Chapter 7. Their property rights exist only through state violence. G.A. Cohen demonstrated that capitalist property relations require continuous state coercion. They deploy violence through eviction, trespassing arrest, and enforcement of employment contracts. They resist reforms that would reduce their extraction. Life enslavers, as established in Section 2B, and Chapter 2, parents extract meaning, purpose, emotional satisfaction, social status, legacy, and existential validation from their children's existence. You bear all costs, over 5.9 million in measurable costs, plus immeasurable suffering. Procreation imposed comprehensive costs without any possibility of consent. Life enslavers benefit from your continuous enslavement, so they support the prohibition preventing your exit. State actors. State actors are unjustly enriched from your enslavement through the extraction of taxes, approximately 805,000 over your lifetime, forced labor through jury duty at $15 to $40 a day, while judges earn $244,000 per year, and legitimacy from your forced participation. Neuroscience research demonstrates that exercising power produces neurological rewards, dopamine release, activation of reward centers. State actors receive neurological pleasure from exercising violence. They resist reforms limiting their power because limiting violence would eliminate their rewards. These four categories overlap substantially. Licensed professionals are often parents. Capitalists participate democratically. Parents vote and serve on juries. Each category establishes independent liability. Together, they form a majority coalition benefiting your enslavement. Creation of peril. One who creates a peril for another has a duty to make reasonable steps to eliminate the danger. Democratic participants created a systematic peril through authorizing violence, maintaining an artificial scarcity of capital, work or starve, authorizing occupational licensing to restrict your ability to earn a livelihood without the master state's permission, authorizing property taxation to enforce the involuntary disposal of your labor, authorizing violent psychiatric commitment for expressing an intent to opt out, authorizing violence against those who assist others with obtaining a peaceful exit. They created the conditions making existence unbearable. They bear the duty to eliminate the danger. Duty-based control. One who exercises control over another's circumstances has a duty to act reasonably in that control. Democratic participants. Control your ability to earn a livelihood through occupational licensing. Control your use of your own property through zoning, taxation, and eminent domain. Control your physical liberty through involuntary commitment. Control your ability to exit through prohibition backed by violence. This comprehensive control creates corresponding duties. The public cannot exercise extensive control over your life while negating responsibility for its harmful consequences. Special relationship duty. Social contract theory, despite its failures documented below, presupposes a special relationship between democratic participants and the state. If the relationship exists, it creates reciprocal duties. Democratic participants claim authority to deploy violence to maintain systems. This claim, if legitimate, establishes a duty to ensure those systems don't cause unjustifiable harm. The public has breached this duty. They maintain systems causing comprehensive harm and on a perpetual basis. They benefit from the system. They refuse to provide material support to those who do not benefit from the system. They prohibit a peaceful exit. They breach every duty their claimed relationship with the state would create. Why democratic structure cannot remedy life slavery? Even if the public recognize their obligations, structural features prevent democratic reform. A. John Stemmons demonstrated that genuine political obligation requires voluntary acceptance of political authority. Being born within claimed borders does not constitute consent. You never agreed to be bound by democratic decisions. You never had an opportunity to refuse. Albert Hirschman established that organizational legitimacy requires feasible exit options. When exit is prohibited, voice, participation becomes coerced rather than voluntary. Democracy without a right to exit is tyranny. Democratic participation under threat of violence is compliance under duress. This cannot legitimize democratic violence deployed against you. Anthony Downs identified rational ignorance as fundamental to democracy. Individual votes have a negligible causal impact on electoral outcomes, since the probability of casting a deciding vote is near zero, while the information cost is positive. Rational individuals maintain ignorant. Excuse me. Since the probability of casting a deciding vote is near zero, while the information cost is positive, rational individuals remain ignorant about policy details. Brian Kaplan showed voters are systematically biased toward bad policies. This doesn't eliminate individual moral responsibility, it makes it worse. Voters understand violence they haven't bothered to understand. No, voters authorize violence they haven't bothered to understand. They will coercive power despite their ignorance. An individual vote may not determine outcomes, but each vote is a personal act of authorization. When you vote for a prohibition on opting out, you authorize violence even if your vote did not swing the election. When you vote for occupational licensing, you authorize violence against those who sought to earn a livelihood without state permission, even if the policy would have passed without your vote. Participation in collective violence creates individual moral responsibility, regardless of its causal impact on outcomes. The rational ignorance problem demonstrates why democracy cannot reform life slavery, but it doesn't absolve participants of responsibility for the violence they authorize, while remaining ignorant of its consequences. Mancur Olson identified the collective action problem. Small groups with concentrated benefits organize effectively, while large groups with diffuse costs fail to organize. The benefits of violence are concentrated. Rent seekers, capitalists, life enslavers, and state actors benefit substantially. Costs are diffuse. Those harmed are unorganized, poor, and lack resources. Martin Gillens and Benjamin Page demonstrated that policy outcomes reflect elite preferences, not average citizens. When only average citizens support changes, nothing happens. The mechanism: wealthy elites use wealth extracted through state interference to capture democratic processes. This is not fixable. It's intrinsic to combining capitalism with democracy. This doesn't eliminate public responsibility, it demonstrates the public's complicity in maintaining systems that don't serve them. The public knows, or easily could discover, that democracy doesn't reflect their preferences, yet they continue voting, continue participating, continue legitimizing the captured system. They do nothing to reform it. They don't organize mass movements to end elite capture. They don't withdraw participation to delegitimize that system. They don't refuse to authorize violence that serves elite interests rather than their own. They support the system and do nothing to change it. This reveals their true priority. Maintaining the legitimacy of democratic violence matters more to them than whether that violence serves their interests or reflects their will. Lena Gutner examined how democratic systems systematically sacrifice minorities to majority preferences. Majorities benefit from maintaining violence. Rent seekers, those who hold occupational licenses, extract wage premiums. Capitalists and property owners extract surplus values and rent. Life enslavers benefit emotionally from their life slaves' continued enslavement. State actors extract taxes, labor, and neurological rewards from exercising power. These groups overlap substantially, creating a solid majority coalition benefiting from violence. The beneficiaries of your enslavement outvote you. Democratic participants don't merely benefit passively from violence, they actively authorize it through electoral participation, voting for candidates who support prohibition, occupational licensing, property taxation, involuntary commitment, and criminalization of assistance. Jury service for rendering verdicts, enforcing unjust laws, convicting people for victimless offenses, and upholding property claims divorced from productive use, reporting suicidal ideation, triggering involuntary commitment, psychiatric violence, forced treatment, tax payment, funding the state's violence deployment system, cultural enforcement, stigmatizing those who question existence, pathologizing those who recognize their own enslavement, and and celebrating procreation. They know about the violence. Courts documented Chapter 3, cataloged it. Academic studies analyze it. The news media reports it. The information is readily available. They could withdraw consent at minimal personal cost. Refusing to vote is an option. Jury nullification is an option. Choosing not to report others is an option. Opposing unjust laws is an option. They support life slavery because it's in their self-interest. They benefit from the violence. They want continued extraction, so they authorize the violence, participate in deploying it, then claim they bear no responsibility. The four categories of democratic participants. Democratic participants fall into four categories based on the relationship to state violence. Understanding these categories reveals why democratic reform is structurally impossible. The apathetic, who are the majority. They know the information is available. Courts document state violence, studies analyze it. The news reports it. They could educate themselves at minimal cost by reading court cases, examining studies, and listening to affected people. They choose not to because it's not my problem. I'm too busy. Somebody else will fix it. I have my own life to worry about. This isn't ignorance, it's reckless indifference. They could know. They could choose to know. They could no, they benefit from not knowing because knowledge would create a moral obligation to act. Reckless indifference is morally equivalent to knowing participation. They authorize state violence while refusing to acknowledge what they authorize. The cowards. They understand the injustice. They recognize that existence was imposed without consent, that the prohibition on a humane as it is enslavement, that courts deny relief, and that democracy serves the system of life slavery. They see it, but they fear retaliation, losing employment for expressing radical views, social ostracism from family and community, loss of professional licenses for refusing to report a dangerous ideation, being labeled mentally ill for questioning existence, and violent state responses to civil disobedience. They choose complicity over resilience. They choose complicity over resistance because resistance is dangerous and complicity is safe. They value their security more than others' freedom. They calculate the risk and determine that challenging the system is too costly. These are moral cowards. They see injustice. They possess the capacity to resist, but choose complicity to preserve comfort. They are the good slave masters of life slavery. The authoritarians, the active supporters, they don't merely benefit passively, they actively support state violence. Licensed professionals who lobby for legislation expanded licensing requirements, they oppose reforms reducing barriers to entry, they fund political campaigns to maintain a system, corporations who deploy violence through eviction, trespassing, arrest, and enforcement of exploitative employment contracts, capitalists who resist labor organizing, oppose minimum wage increases, and fight healthcare reforms. Life enslavers support the prohibition on opting out because their emotional benefits depend on their continued extraction from life slaves. State actors oppose reforms limiting their violence while enjoying neurological rewards from exercising power. Beyond material benefits, the psychological beneficiaries enjoy violence as an instrument of control. They don't benefit economically, they benefit from the feeling of power itself. Research on authoritarianism demonstrates certain personality types derive satisfaction from controlling others, enforcing hierarchy, and punishing deviance. They identify with power and punch down. When they see someone suffering, they blame the victim. When they see someone unable to escape their involuntary existence, they tell them to stop whining and support state violence being used against those enslaved. When they see someone challenging authority, they support state violence being deployed to crush resistance. Natural slaves perpetuate enslavement. Aristotle distinguished between those with deliberate capacity and natural slaves who lack the capacity to reason independently about what ought to be done. Natural slaves can follow law, but they cannot deliberate about whether rules are unjust. They accept authority without questioning legitimacy. They obey because authority commands, not because they've reasoned about whether obedience is ethically justified. The public demonstrates these characteristics, but not through crude defenses of authority. Their lack of deliberative capacity manifests through sophisticated deflection strategies that avoid the central fact. In a democracy, they are the ones doing this. They vote, they serve on juries, they report others, they fund the violence, they authorize every act of state violence through their participation, yet they speak as if they are passive observers rather than active participants. Procedural evasion. I understand, but we have to think about the greater good. Focus on incremental change, not dismantling the system. They redirect from questions of legitimacy to questions of process, but they are the system. In a democracy, the public is the master state. They cannot acknowledge this because it would require accepting responsibility for the violence they deploy. False sympathy as absolution. I'm sorry to hear that. They express concern while doing nothing, as if systemic violence happens independently of their choices, but they authorize the violence they claim to be against. Every vote continues the prohibition. Every jury service enforces unjust laws. Every tax payment funds state violence. Every report triggers involuntary commitment. The sympathy is insincere. One cannot sympathize with suffering one actively causes. Performative happiness. What can I do? I'm just one person. This is the most dishonest deflection. They are the ones doing it. They vote for candidates who maintain a prohibition. They serve on juries that deny exit rights. They report concerning statements. They pay taxes to fund state violence. They lobby for occupational licensing. They resist reforms threatening their extraction. They make people's lives a living hell. Then they claim, what can I do? Stop doing it. Stop voting for it. Stop serving on juries enforcing it. Stop reporting people. Stop funding it. Stop extracting from it. In a democracy, what can I do translates to I want to keep doing this while pretending I'm not responsible. Appeal to necessity. The greater good requires some sacrifice. They decide what counts as the greater good. They benefit from the sacrifice they impose on others. They extract wage premium, surplus value, emotional satisfaction, and tax revenue. Then they claim this extraction serves some abstract collective interest. They cannot ask who benefits from this greater good and who pays the cost, because the answer is obvious. They benefit, you pay the cost. This extends to procreation. When confronted with arguments about the moral debt for life enslavement, they respond with the same evasions. I wanted children, biological drives as a justification. Everyone does it. Social conviction as ethics. It's natural. Appeal to nature fallacy. Children give me meaning. Their benefits justify life enslavement. They cannot acknowledge. I chose to create this person. I benefit from their existence. I support systems that prevent their exit because their exit would eliminate my benefits. The democratic evasion of agency. The core problem. In a democracy, the public does not observe violence. The public deploys violence. Democratic theory itself holds that The government acts as an agent of the people. Citizens authorize, officials execute. When a state prohibits exit involuntary commits people, seizes property, prevents people from earning a livelihood, and extracts taxes. The public is doing this. The majority lacks deliberative capacity not because they cannot think, but because they refuse to acknowledge their agency. They can reason about means but not ends, debate policy details but not whether state authority is legitimate, express sympathy but not admit they are causing the suffering, and claim powerlessness but not acknowledge their own power. A more dangerous tyranny. The sophisticated evasion is more dangerous than crude authoritarianism. The crude authoritarian who says obey or else accepts responsibility for deploying violence, but the democratic participant says, I'm sorry you're suffering, but what can I do? Denies responsibility while continuing to deploy violence. They stab people and then act surprised when they bleed. In a democracy, this denial becomes the foundation of tyranny. The majority deploys violence while pretending to be powerless observers. They cannot be reasoned with because acknowledging their agency would require accepting more responsibility for the comprehensive violence they deploy. This is why democracy cannot remedy systemic oppression. The majority is the master but refuses to acknowledge their power. The fundamental flaw. Democracy gives coercive power to people who do not understand they are wielding it. Every vote authorizes the state to deploy guns, cages, and seizures and enforcement. But voters do not comprehend this. They think voting is mere participation or expressing preferences, like choosing a restaurant, not authorizing comprehensive violence against real people. When they vote for prohibitions on opting out, they deploy psychiatric violence. When they vote for occupational licensing, they criminalize earning a livelihood. When they vote for property taxes, they authorize seizure. When they vote for involuntary commitment laws, they authorize kidnapping and forced drugging. The refusal of responsibility. Voters are looking for someone else to fix problems when they hold the power themselves. Voters are looking for someone else to fix problems when they hold the power themselves. They are the government in democracy. They authorize every act of state violence. They could withdraw authorization by refusing to vote for prohibition, refusing to serve on juries, enforcing unjust laws, refusing to report people, refusing to fund violence. But they will not because that would require acknowledging what they are, the masters. Those who refuse to acknowledge their agency in wielding coercive power should not be trusted with it. They deploy comprehensive violence while claiming helplessness. They benefit from extraction while expressing sympathy. They authorize enslavement while asking, what can I do? They are unfit to govern, not because they lack intelligence, but because they refuse to accept responsibility for the violence they deploy. This is the tragedy of democracy. It distributes coercive power among people who do not understand they possess it, who will not acknowledge what they do with it, who cannot be reasoned with about it because such reasoning would require accepting the moral responsibility they desperately seek to avoid. The revolutionaries, small minority. They recognize injustice and act against it by organizing labor movements challenging capitalist extraction, engaging in civil disobedience against unjust laws, refusing to participate in state violence, conscientious objection, jury nullification, tax resistance, challenging property rights through direct action, refusing to procreate, supporting unconditional exit rights publicly despite personal risk. They prove opposition is possible, that individuals can resist despite personal costs, but they remain systematically defeated because the majority benefits from violence and will not voluntarily relinquish benefits. Courts deny relief through immunity doctrines. The master state deploys overwhelming violence against resistance. Cultural hegemony labels resistors as mentally ill, dangerous, selfish, and immoral. The existence of revolutionary prove the system's illegitimacy. If the system were just, there would be no principled resistance. But the systematic defeat proves democracy cannot remedy life slavery when majorities benefit from maintaining it. What democratic participants owe? What democratic participants owe is clear. Stop extracting. The people around you, parents, partners, friends, employers, landlords, the state, are making demands while draining your life force. If they want to continue extracting, they must pay to continue. They must pay you to continue existing for their benefit. They must pay the full price of your enslavement. Democratic participants face the same choice the master state faces. The fundamental reality, opting out could be the solution to all of your problems, e.g., death discharges a borrower's student loan debt. But they prohibit, and there's a citation there which goes to a federal code, which basically says that, I think I mentioned it a second time here, but basically it says that the Secretary of Education has to discharge your student loan debts upon receiving a notice of your death. I believe a death certificate. But they prohibit the solution through violence for their benefit. Because they prohibit the solution, they must address the underlying problems. Two options: withdraw the state violence prohibiting an unconditional right to opt out. Repeal involuntary commitment laws. Decriminalize assistance with people as it provide peaceful means through medical aid and dying. Remove all state-imposed criteria and gatekeeping. This ends state-wide slavery. Those who wish to opt out will be able to do so peacefully. Those who prefer to continue remain free to do so. No one is forced to exist. Option two: provide full support dismantling provide full support dismantling violence-backed systems. If they insist on prohibiting your right to exit, if they insist on forcing you to continue existing for their benefit, they must provide universal basic income, sufficient for a comfortable existence without forced labor, guaranteed housing, quality housing, not just shelters, universal health care, comprehensive, no gatekeeping, food security, nutritious food, not SNAP limitations, occupational licensing reforms, eliminate artificial barriers to entry, elimination of state interference with free markets. This is full socialism, comprehensive material support for forced continuation. If they force you to live against your will, they must provide everything necessary for you to maintain a bearable existence. The strategic purpose, making option two explicit, demanding full socialism if they prohibit your right to opt out, makes maintaining life slavery slavery prohibitively expensive. The public must face the true cost of forcing people to live against their will. Most will not want to pay this cost. Licensing professionals will not support eliminating occupational licensing. They lose their wage premiums. Capitalists will not support universal basic income. This eliminates worker-starved coercion. Absent property owners will not support guaranteed housing. This reduces their rent. Life enslavers will not support full material support for their adult children because it costs too much. When faced with the actual cost of maintaining a prohibition on opting out, most will prefer option one, permit opting out. It costs nothing to them. Those who want to continue can continue. Those who want to exit can exit peacefully. The extraction ends, but so does the expense. The goal is not to achieve socialism. The goal is to make prohibition so expensive that it becomes politically impossible. Conclusion: democracy without a right to exit is tyranny. The life slave is surrounded by demands. Be successful. Live for me. Validate me. Give me grandkids. Smile for me. Justify my ethics. Follow my morals. Obey my unjust laws. Energy flows from the life slave to the life slave's masters. This is the democratic public's relationship to you. The public's happiness comes at others' expense, and systems maintained through violence. Some people's comfort requires others' suffering. The public, life enslavers demanding grandchildren, partners demanding validation, friends demanding benefits, employers demanding labor, landlords demanding rent, the state demanding taxes, are extracting value from you. You are being drained to serve their needs. When those who bear concentrated costs reach the point where they have nothing to lose, the public's continued insistence on forcing participation becomes not merely immoral, but strategically foolish. This chapter has demonstrated that the public bears direct liability for comprehensive state violence through their active authorization. that democracy structurally cannot remedy life slavery when participation is coerced and majorities benefit from maintaining the system, and that democratic participants owe either withdrawal of prohibition or full material support. But what exactly are the measurable costs you bear? What specific debts are owed? Chapter 9 provides the complete accounting. All right, so that is the end of chapter 8. Thank